Good afternoon, everyone, once again, and welcome back to Foundations and Wellness YouTube channel. And such an honor to have you here again, Teresa Grieco. Got the integrative and functional nurse practitioner here with me today. Teresa, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well as always. It's sunshine out today, no more rain, so I'm really, really good today.
Me
And
too. The sun is shining. It's been raining all week here. I'm so happy.
it's
Great.
awesome. And
Yeah.
I'm fired up for this one because this is always one of my most favorite subjects to talk about. And I've been through mold back and forth and around and all over again several times, and it seems to follow me. So I feel like I'm very well equipped to talk about this one from the
You
heart.
and me both.
'Cause it's just such gosh, it's such a beast, mold is. And so what a treat to talk about this topic here today. And I hope that all the viewers watching this will definitely find a lot of nuggets and takeaways that they can start implementing in their life and in their health and just all the ins and outs that goes into mold. I think it's a very highly overlooked topic when it comes to even functional medicine. So many people overlook it and miss it, maybe because there's not much education or they just don't know what to do. But I'm glad that we get to address that topic today. So, without further ado, I don't even know where to begin with this, but I would like to just share a quick story because I've told you this past week we discovered our appliance, our dishwasher, leaked, and it's been an ongoing 2-year minor leak that I just found out, and I took photos. And if any of you viewers are not followers of the Foundations and Wellness Facebook page, head on over there because I did make a post where you can actually see the mold and the water damage that was occurring behind the appliance. And that's one thing appliances are notorious for are leaks. But anyway, let's get right on into it and talk about mold. What exactly is mold and why is it dangerous, or what determines
There's,
dysfunction, I'll
yeah,
say.
so there's different kinds of mold, and in the mold world, which is sounds funny, there's a whole little mold community. Um, there's and molds and yeast are not the same thing, although they can be clumped together in the fungal category. So just as a to throw that out there in the beginning. So when we talk fungus, we could be talking mold, but we could be talking yeast. But we're going to talk about mold today. So, and mold could be a primary colonizer, a secondary colonizer, and a tertiary colonizer.
What is that?
Yeah, so the it's the degree to which the mold does its damage, proliferates, and creates more damage. Primary colonizers are things like Aspergillus, Penicillium, kind of ubiquitous, meaning they're kind of everywhere. Like
Hmm.
I test for this often. In the fall, there's a big uptick because Aspergillus is created it's when leaves and plant things, substances start to break down. So in the
Hmm.
fall, you think about all the leaves on the trees and it's rainy and so the leaves start to break down and they create this aspergillus. And then, it gets drug into the house on our shoes. Maybe, we open up the windows and it gets blown in. It often rests on the top of windowsills and
Hmm.
door frames. Aspergillus is also, it's the fuzzy stuff that you see like when your lemon starts to turn bad and you see the fuzzy green, that's Aspergillus or penicillium. It's usually penicillium. So harmful, yes. Ubiquitous, yes. Easier to overcome. Create some problems, not as much. Then the secondary colonizers are things like a different kind of Aspergillus and Cladosporium. Those can occur with damp, moist, dark situations. A lot of times, bathrooms, appliances, things like that. Those are the places that you'll see those. They cause a little bit more of an issue. Then the tertiary colonizers is where we get into the big bad boys, and those are things like Stachybotrys is one of them. That's
Hmm.
black mold and brown mold, just horrible, horrific, terrible for the health, especially if someone is sensitive for other reasons. Their toxin bucket, as we talk about, has already been filled up with other things. So black mold very, very negatively impacts the health. Then the other thing that we can have is mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are the byproduct of mold degradation. So as mold starts to break down, it releases these poisons like aquatoxin, aflatoxin, things like that. I forget how to say that, gruselin. So there's different ones. Also not great. I mean, if you start to have those, you know that you've been exposed to mold somewhere somehow.
Hmm.
So whereas some of the molds, as I said, are kind of everywhere, you just kind of know that you're going to get exposed. Don't create as many health issues for some people. Um, they're not quite as preventable. Like you can't control the trees and leaves, like you can't prevent that. You can take your
Yeah.
shoes off when you walk into the house. That would be one way to prevent them being, coming into your house. But the things that we find in the black mold category, that's stuff where like the downspout overflows and it starts to drip into the basement and it's damp behind the wall, but you don't notice it because it hasn't seeped through. It's
Right.
behind the wall, so it's kind of encapsulated, but it still can have a negative impact. It's the stuff that you see growing on the grout in the bathroom.
Hmm.
Can be the thing that you saw with your dishwasher. That was definitely Stachybotrys. You just can't.
Oh,
And
I'm sure.
and it's not, and there's never like a one and done. There's always a mixture of them. They always like have a mixture of. So so yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what the different categories of mold are, and what they can do as far as how they can grow. The other
Definitely.
place I will tell you, the other place it's really prevalent is think warm, dark, moist, or even just warm and moist. So humid,
Hmm.
arid, places. The beach houses. Oh my gosh, every time, every summer. So in the fall, it's aspergillus. In the summertime, when I have people coming home from their time at the beach and I do testing, we always see something. Sometimes it's the Stachybotrys, sometimes it's one of the other colonizers, but we almost always see something because the warm, moist air of the beach at the seashore enters in through the house, and warmer, hotter climates where we use the air conditioning a lot. That's one of the places where mold can grow really prevalently because the whole idea of an HVAC system or air conditioner is to pull the moisture out of the air.
Hmm.
And pardon me. So if we don't take care to clean the HVAC system or put a UV light filter where it's killing off the spores that come into the air system, then we end up, and then we're blowing that moldy spores all over the house every time the AC turns on.
Yeah, it's become very convoluted very quickly on what to do. And so what I hear from you is that a mold species, there's a lot of them.
Mm.
It's ubiquitous in nature.
Hmm.
And what I always like to tell people is that due to the fact that it's everywhere in nature, it's there to decompose decaying matter back into organic matter
Yeah,
to help promote life cycles in
right.
stages. But we would almost cease to exist if mold wasn't around. And
100%. Yeah,
so it's a great thing, but it's problematic when it grows indoors
yeah,
because it doesn't have other competing molds to
yep,
keep it in check. And so it often just overgrows and overgrows into this enormous
yep,
beast. And like you said, it lurks behind dark, cool, damp, humid places. And that's oftentimes in wall cavities, unless it's behind an appliance or an appliance is leaked, such as a refrigerator,
yep,
a washing machine, a dishwasher, or under a bathroom or a kitchen sink or
yep,
behind a bathroom wall. And I've had mold in all these places in different residences that I've lived in and what I experienced.
yeah,
And what I always like to say is that no one is exempt from having water damage or mold, because we all have plumbing, we all have piping in our homes,
yeah.
we all have hard freezes. Most
Almost
every
everyone has HVAC or some kind of air conditioner, even if it's a window unit. There's hardly any houses without that. So yeah, it's really,
and modern homes today are built with such tightness that it entraps everything, and they don't
yeah,
have the free flowing breathing that they used
yeah,
to in decades ago. Maybe
right.
our
They
grandparents.
literally wrap houses in this plastic, before they throw the siding or whatever the stonework they
Mhm.
do. They wrap the whole house in plastic before they do that. It's like, oh my gosh,
And it
it's just
traps
this.
It's
Yeah, it
bad.
just
Yeah.
traps everything. Yeah.
Traps everything in and you don't have no free flowing air to come in and out.
Yeah.
Again, there's different construction like, and we can
Right.
get into building biology, which is a whole nother topic on how
Right.
should be designed.
Yeah.
But I think for people like construction is just time is money and it's a project. So they come in, they build very quickly and they go out and then boom, it's done. And then you have not on top of that with mold, but then you can have because of the new construction, and this is going off on a tangent here, but VOCs, which is a whole nother thing.
Right.
We'll talk about that another time because getting
Right.
back to the mycotoxins you mentioned, mycotoxins you said were the byproduct of mold. So we have mold, and that's the stuff we would see like on a moldy piece of fruit or bread, or in
Yeah.
fact on a wall. And then it's these gases or the mold poop, as I like to say, this
Right.
byproduct that's
Yep.
created that is all
That's a nice way to
toxic.
say it. I say degradation. Poop is so much nicer.
Mold poop, and those are produced by the actual spores of the mold.
Yeah.
And so when we go out into the Smokies, when I lived in Tennessee, or if you go up into the area where you are in Pennsylvania, you can might smell sometimes in the forest the spores in the air. You can just smell it from it just being in natural form in the woods,
Yeah.
from damp, wet wood and material on the forest floor. But the mycotoxins are actually what can cause a lot of the health. Well, both of them can, but the mycotoxins are what can determine, chronic illness or
Yeah.
dysfunction in the human body. And I would say it's the type of mycotoxin or the types, because it's never really just one. There's always a
Yeah.
combination.
Right.
Your duration and the amount of your exposure, along with, your age, your gender, the current health status of that person exposed,
Yeah.
and then the combined effects, including your genetics, your dietary status, and then interactions with other toxic assaults like heavy metals, co-infections from various organisms and
Yep.
slime and parasites, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So,
It's the toxin bucket that we've been talking about, that where we pile all this stuff in. It should have a drain, like a sink where everything drains
Mhm.
out. But if we're throwing stuff in faster than we can either bail it out through our diet and lifestyle or drain it out through the body's natural processes, that's when mold becomes a real issue. And for some people, they can't bail fast enough. And so
Right.
they get behind the eight ball, so to speak, where they just can't overcome, and it creates profound, profound health issues. Your wife is one of them. I
Mhm.
am one of them. I have had several health crises because of mold. The first time I recognized it, because I've had a series, I was comparing notes with my mom, and even growing up, I remember homes that we lived in, my dad was a pastor, so we lived wherever the church put us. And
Mhm.
there was one house that I know had mold in the basement for sure. And then, I had different rental properties that I lived in over the years, for sure 100% had mold in the basement. And it never really bothered me until I had gotten enough stuff in my toxin bucket and didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't really just understand it. So I hadn't really started to detox or heal from that.
Mhm.
And I went to work in a building that was called sick building syndrome, that a whole bunch of us had. I just all of a sudden could not function. I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. I had profound body aches and migraines and pain and fatigue. And it was the building that I was in because they found black mold growing in the walls and they had to condemn the building. It was so bad. And the second time it happened, so I recovered from that, did a whole bunch of stuff, which, we could talk about what I did later. But then the second time it happened, it was it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was living in a condominium and working in another state. So I, would go there every week. And the upstairs bathroom started dripping into mine. And when we opened up the ceiling, there was black mold. Well, that was the first day that I tested positive for COVID. So when I got sick with that, which I normally wouldn't get that sick, I got really sick because it was like a double whammy. It was like I got smacked from both sides and I ended up being super sick for I had COVID really bad for 2 weeks. And it took me like 3 months to recover from the fatigue and the brain fog and things like that. So for some people, now I'm like I'm a super sniffer, when it comes to mold. I can walk into a building and go, there's mold in here. I can smell it. I can feel it, like I can feel it in my body. And I know your wife is one of those too.
She is, and it sounds crazy. And I believe part of that, and I don't have validation of this, but 25% of the population has an HLA genotype, which is
Mm,
just a subset of your genes where you can't clear these mold toxins appropriately.
yeah,
And so
you
you got a
need
quarter of
help.
the population walking around. I think maybe you fall into that category. I
I think
assume
I
my wife
do.
has
Yeah.
these because of y'all's canary-like coal mine state where
Right.
you go into these places, it's an immediate alarm for your body,
Yeah.
but you just know. And some people think we're crazy. Like I've had people literally tell me, because we brought up to them so many times, mold, mold, mold. When I lived in Tennessee, every dwelling we were in had a mold issue.
Yep.
Very first apartment we had was damaged by an F3 tornado in 2020, and I didn't even make the connection yet. About
Yeah.
5 months into, my wife was that we had two miscarries in the same calendar year, and my wife was like, "It's got to be mold." I'm starting to feel like I did when we lived across the street from my mother in Texas.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll run a mycotoxin test. So I did the Vibrant Wellness mycotoxin panel and
Yep.
then tested my environment at the apartment with a mold test. And the molds that were on our mold test correlated with the mycotoxins in her body
In
because
her
they came
urine.
from those
Yep.
exact molds.
Yep. Yeah,
And
it's amazing. And to your point about testing, like what they test for when you do those like real time or vibrant and they test your urine, they're testing for those mycotoxins because those are the things that they can really pick up easily in the urine and the ones that have a lot of health implications. I run tests on every single patient before every appointment. And rarely do I find somebody that doesn't have at least one mycotoxin present.
a
And
lot of us
some of them
have,
are aware of it and some of them aren't, like most of them aren't. So,
I would say most of them are not aware of it. And it's because I think we have to change our vocabulary and the way that we communicate to clients and people when we're discussing mold, because a lot of people think that they're going to see mold or they're going to smell mold, and it's not always the case.
right,
If you
exactly.
if you smell mustiness, that is a telltale sign of an active mold growth somewhere. However, most people think, "Oh no, we had a mold inspector come out. We had there it was all fine," and that's a whole nother conversation about trying to find the right qualified inspector. But
Yeah,
most people don't assess mold, um, or they don't think of having a mold because maybe their home was too new or it was just built or like the inspection from a general contractor.
yep.
So we have to ask them, have you ever had water damage, a leaky appliance, um,
Water, a roof leak,
a roof leak, anything like
the
that?
foundation, where the foundation has a crack, or did you ever notice any moisture in your basement at all? Not,
Mhm.
whether like are the walls damp, not just standing water. When was the last time you had your HVAC cleaned out?
Right. And there's a weird phenomena too with older homes, say not like super old homes like farmhouses and such, but just like homes that were built from the 80s or early 90s. Whenever they use the type of insulation in the attic, if it
Yep,
wasn't a good insulation, it can create a negative pressure from the attic to the actual house. And so what that does, the negative pressure will allow humidity to be trapped in the wall cavities,
yeah,
and then that humidity will just create the growth of mold almost out of nowhere.
yep.
And so I'm
I
running
actually
into
have
a lot
had
of that
folks
as
with that.
well.
Yep. I've
And
had
that is
folks with that.
insane.
Yep. I had a patient of mine, um, built a brand new house and within a year had to move out because there was such profound mold and she had my mold illness. The fancy name is mycotoxicosis, where
Mhm.
she couldn't live in her brand new built from scratch home because it had mold because of that issue in the attic.
That
Yep.
is wild. And I would say, I would be bold to say that mycotoxicosis would equal chronic inflammatory response syndrome, SIRS or CIRS.
100%. Yeah. Like the what goes on in, the buzzword with COVID was in the beginning was that caused the cytokine storm. Well, the
Mhm.
reason they talked about that so much is because that's what happens when we have these chronic inflammatory responses. It can be an acute response, but it can be chronic in that those things are supposed to shut down once the acute illness is over and starts to resolve, and it never does. Like, so we completely get overrun by these pro-inflammatory cytokines and um I'm just drawing a blank on the name I'm trying to come up with, the cofactors, the different things that the immune system produces that are supposed to be, it's
Mediators.
sort of like I take mediators and the modulators. It's sort of like, when you get a cut, like it swells up, it gets a little red, it gets a little warm. That's because your body sent stuff there to heal that cut. You don't want it to, like, you don't want to bleed to death. And you
Right.
also don't want to get gangrene from an infection. So your body does what it's supposed to do. Well, the
Mhm.
same thing happens just like on the skin. It happens inside the body, only this never stabs over and heals. It just continues. And those cytokines and those modulators and mediators just continue to get revved up over and over day after day, depending on what we get exposed to. Also, plays into fact, goes hand in hand with the toxin bucket that we talked about, where we just have so many things that we're trying to deal with that we can't overcome, including, emotional stressors, mental factors. That's all part of it that we can have a whole nother discussion about. But, um, and for some people, because of their genetic predisposition, we have those bad genes that get turned on because there's already the inflammatory response going on somewhere else, that they start to express themselves in a way that, a normal person without those genes wouldn't have trouble with. When I met my husband, he was living in a basement that they found water in. It was a walk-in basement, and they found water in the retention wall. And every time he would come over, I could smell it on him, and it didn't bother him at all. He never got sick ever from it, but I could smell it. And so, I'd be like, please take your clothes and, like put your coat on. I can't be around you until you. So when he moved out of there after we got married, we had to completely purge or wash everything that he had so that I could safely be around it. But, yeah, so it can be a really devastating for someone who is genetically set up with just the right predisposing factors,
Mhm.
or regardless, even if they don't have the genes, if they have so many other things that their body's trying to deal with in so many other ways, it could be that, as one of our friend says, it could be that perfect storm, that one thing that just causes that tipping event to where they have this full blown illness that starts from that really bad mold exposure,
The perfect
or
storm.
prolonged mold exposure too.
Right. And I know we're coming short up on time. We got about 10 minutes left. I just want to say that. And there's a lot that I want to unpack here in this time.
Yeah,
One
I
thing
think we
to
should at
say,
least talk symptoms. If that's not where you're going, we should at least do that.
I definitely will. And I wanted to say this one stat here is that according to the Implementing Health Protective Features and Practices in Buildings, they say that 43% of buildings they examined had current water damage and
Hmm.
85% had past water damage. What people need to know is that when water damage occurs, mold can grow in as little as 24 to 48 hours. So
Mhm.
you need to immediately put fans
Yep.
wherever you find the water leak, because if you don't know how long it's been leaking, that 24 to 48-hour time window is a precious amount of time that you're
Yeah.
now racing against. And
Right.
when you were mentioning about the genetic setup of some individuals, that's why 1 in 4 people, one gets chronically ill while the other three seemingly are unaffected.
Right.
What that means for me now, understanding this, is that when my wife starts feeling terrible, that's my car's check engine light coming on and telling me I need to
Yep.
start taking action to investigate where the problem is because
Right.
she's the alarm that's going, hey, alert, alert, alert. We need to
Yep.
go and
We
look
are the
for.
canary in the cave.
And I
Yep.
bet you were the same way. So
Yeah.
for your husband, like if something were to happen to you or you're like, I just don't feel right, that's like an automatic red flag that I need to
Yeah.
know, right? I got to go investigate my
Yeah.
environment. So
Yeah.
with symptoms,
And you know what? I just want to throw this out there, it just came to mind. So the other places that we can get exposed to mold, besides the obvious fuzzy growth on food, are things that we don't see the mold before it comes into our house. And that is things like peanuts,
yep,
beans, legumes, coffee,
grains, coffee.
grains. Yep. Yeah. Things that are processed, like coffee is ground, it's
Mhm.
hulled and ground before it comes into our house. Peanuts are usually shelled before they come into our house, but those are those are things, ways that mold we could get exposed to mold, and we don't even see it. We haven't seen it.
Right.
Yeah.
And even organic coffees too. Just because your coffee bag says organic on it doesn't mean it's exempt from having mycotoxins from that roasting process.
Yeah.
I used to work for a cardiologist who sourced his own coffee beans and then third-party lab tested them all um, before he sold the bags. And it's called cardiology coffee.
Wow.
And it tastes really good. It's from Honduras and it's locally grown, but he tests it all for mycotoxins and heavy metals and acrylics, and it's a great coffee. Bulletproof is another one. Purity is another one that people can get right off of Amazon. There's Kamano Island coffee. That's another one. These are all third-party lab tested to ensure there's no mycotoxins or other contaminants that would, you know, contaminate your coffee in the morning and
Right.
contribute
I have
that.
I mean, we both don't eat breakfast, so breakfast is lunch. And so that's
My
where
coffee is my breakfast.
yeah, right. So, I want to talk real quick, symptoms.
Well, can I ask you that question before you get into the
Oh
symptoms?
yeah, sure. Go
The
ahead.
question would be, how does mold start the process of lowering a person's immunity or their autoimmunity flare? How does mold start that process? And what symptoms could they look out for?
Yeah. So how it starts the process, is that it triggers those immune responses. So anything that comes into the body that it sees as a foreign invader, is the fancy name is an antigen, right? And so then the body begins to make antibodies to counteract the antigen. So think of the antigen as the bad guy. It's the burglar in the house, right? And the antibodies, and there's different kinds of them, are like the alarm system, the police that show up, the firemen that show up. They all have different jobs that they do, and they turn, and then the resources that they use are like, for the firemen, it's like the hoses and the axe and to break down the doors and things like that. So our immune system is the same way. So when this burglar comes into our house, the immune system goes, hey, I need to do something, and it starts to create these antibodies. And then part of that response is to send out those pro-inflammatory things, just like when we cut our hand, that is going to sequester and sequel the response, except that sometimes it doesn't turn off because the body is already on high alert for something else. So we've talked about leaky gut in the past, where food can be an antigen and the immune system responds against that. Where the body then, for autoimmune, it's when the immune system is kind of like found that the body itself, the tissue somewhere is the enemy, it's the burglar. And so when you already have those predispositions, because you already have those processes going on, then it's like the immune system is going, I got to do this and I got to do that and I can do that. And I have so many things to do. And it just creates this wildfire of inflammation. And the other thing that happens is, we've talked too in the past about the cell and cellular inflammation and how the cell membrane gets affected. So, and how everything inside the cell then can become inflamed, including the mitochondria, which is our energy production, how we detoxify, we make glutathione, how we convert hormones and things like that. It's also the cellular inflammation is part of what turns on those bad genes. So if the cell becomes inflamed, the cell membrane becomes inflamed, and everything inside the cell doesn't work the way it's supposed to, then the glutathione production goes down, energy production goes down, the liver can't do what it's supposed to do well. And then we end up with the symptoms, which for everybody can be a little bit different, but I will tell you, for the most part, what I see is like profound fatigue, brain fog,
Real
muscle
quick, while you're
ache.
talking about symptoms here, can you make me host so I can share the screen? I have a list of symptoms that you're going to
Oh, yeah,
cover.
sure.
People can
Yep.
see visually.
Yeah. Let's do that. And there
And
we go.
thank you. And then
Yep.
go back on, you were saying muscle weakness and
Yeah.
fatigue.
So profound fatigue, brain fog, body aches, joint pain, difficulty concentrating, memory issues, the whole cognitive thing. Sometimes pins and needles because it affects the nervous system,
Mhm.
where the feet and the hands start to tingle and can't recover. Um, Migraines, headaches. Yeah, what else did I miss?
Any of these you
I
see on
got a
screen
lot of
here,
them.
are any of these that you see on screen here that you dealt with personally in your mold story?
Yeah, the fatigue for sure. Malaise, like I would walk up the stairs feeling like I was wearing a 50-pound backpack. Brain fog, memory issues like that. It's not just that like having that what we call joke around and say, "Oh, I'm having a senior moment." No, it's like you cannot think of what you want to say. You cannot remember the things. Um,
My
I had
wife would always say it's feeling
headaches,
like
vertigo. Yep.
walking waist deep through water.
Yeah.
Like her legs from her waist down are all underwater and she's walking through water like that
Yep.
extra
I used to
force.
say it was like walking in quicksand. Yep.
Yeah, walking in cement or quicksand.
Vertigo. I had vertigo really bad. One point I had it so bad that I had nystagmus where my eyes would shutter. Um,
Man,
Joint pain, arthritic pain, very sensitive to light, very sensitive to noise. Never had the shortness of breath or the cough, although I had chronic postnasal drip, and I think it was because I had mold in my sinuses. And once I used, um, I started using a neti pot with silver in it, and
mhm.
I killed what was in there. Then the postnasal drip went away.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah,
you mentioned about the neti pot where you can, or the silvers, you can nebulize silver. And I have right
Mhm.
here a little portable nebulizer that you can pick up off Amazon for like 40 bucks. And you can put silver in here and just,
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. Silver's
yeah,
great.
well,
Silver's a great antimicrobial. It's good for so many things. I recommend it in the nose, in the belly, it's on
a
cuts, on the
huge,
skin,
your sinus area is a huge reason why people don't really get wells because they don't treat.
dark, moist,
Mhm. And
damp, right?
it has its own biofilms can be created up here. And I know that people are probably like,
And it
what do
has
you
little
mean?
like nooks and crannies that things can just hide in. It has like little ripples in it.
And we swallow that postnasal drip and we reseed ourselves with the mycotoxins in our
Yep.
gut. And it's
All
just
the
a
time.
recurring cycle. And people wonder why they never get well. They never address
Yeah.
this part here with doing
Yeah.
nasal flushes.
Yeah, all the time. It's one of the first things I do when I have anybody come to me with any kind of asthma, allergy,
Mhm.
sinus, anything. I'm like, neti pot, add some silver. Neti pot either add the silver to the neti pot while you're rinsing or spray silver, colloidal silver afterwards, or do both. I have them do both until that calms down.
Sometimes my wife and I would experience this, me not so much, but every once in a while, like if I get congested and I do the silver spray and I use Argentine 23,
Yep.
when I squirt that stuff up my nose, it'll burn like fire so bad.
Yep.
When it does, that's usually a sign of it's killing something.
It's inflamed and it's killing something. Yep.
There have been times when I squirted it, not a thing. And then there's times when I squirt it and it's like, oh, for about 30 seconds. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh
The
man.
frontal sinuses are like
Oh
on
yeah.
fire.
But
Yeah.
it feels so much better. And that happens more so to my wife than it does me. What you were talking about, the shortness of breath, it wasn't really shortness of breath that we dealt with, but it was more like that air hunger where
Yeah.
you're always feeling like you can't ever get a good,
Good
satisfying
solid
breath.
breath.
You gotta
Yep.
just like,
Yep.
ah man. That's what we would experience. And I would
Yeah.
say the most common are like this stiffness in your joints or your
Yep.
neck, or this type of pain or this ice pick pain, like in your
Yep.
shoulders or back somewhere.
Yep.
Those are always
Or
coming.
or I would actually feel like a veil of heaviness. It was like this,
Yeah,
just like this dark,
like a
heavy
cloud is over
cloud.
you.
Yeah. It
It's
was
so strange. Excuse me.
horrible.
It's bad.
Especially when one of the times that it happened really badly, it was I had given up coffee because I'm a little bit of a coffee snob, very particular, and I don't like anything in it because I just like dark black coffee. But I had given it up because I was like, I was removing anything from my body that I thought could be harmful and
Mhm.
cause a trigger. It was an autoimmune kind of paleo diet that I was doing. But I found this coffee substitute that was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be not contaminated, no gluten, nothing. And this is when I was working in that moldy building before I knew that the building had mold. And we were sitting at breakfast one day and I took one sip of that drink and that veil came down over me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that it's I couldn't figure out why I was feeling so badly, and it was so immediate. I was like, it's that drink. That whatever is in there is triggering and adding to what I was already dealing with. So
Um,
sometimes it can be when you're in and that was right at the beginning of that health crisis I was having. And I had taken the ironic thing about that situation, I had taken that job because I had been working for 20 years in a really stressful ICU, ER. I worked in both. And I was
mhm.
like, this is an easy job. It's a desk job. I'll just do case management, easy peasy. I can just like let my nervous system have a little break from all the stress. But the building that I worked in was more stressful on my body than all the codes that I went to and the people whose lives I tried to save and things like that, and being on my feet for 12 hours a day. Yeah, it was,
Mold is such an insidious toxin that robs the
yeah,
vitality. It suppresses your immune system so much. It hinders your ability to detoxify. So if
yeah.
you're trying to do cleanses or
Make
detoxes,
energy,
that out the
cannot make
window.
energy. Yeah,
Can't. And then
yeah,
for those yourself or my wife, those types of individuals,
yeah,
it almost like it's a compound effect where it just at an exponential rate, those symptoms that we named off are much more
yeah.
worse. And so yeah, disrupting immunity and hormone production, your sleep disturbances because your melatonin is thrown off. You have
Yep.
the food
It
sensitivity,
affects your gut.
irritable
Yeah,
bowel. So
yep.
your whole gut is inflamed. And then you have your control tower up here. Your brain is just completely compromised. And so there's that severe fatigue
Hmm.
factor. And you just, there's so many things that mold will do. And it's just such an overlooked factor, I think, in so many people's cases. And I would always say that if people are on protocols after protocols after protocols and they're not getting better, or maybe they get a little bit better, but they plateau all the time, I would suggest, investigating your environment for mold. And
There's two things that I say. People, if we put people on protocol after protocol and they're not getting better, check your mouth and check your house, right? Because if we could have, like 70% of disease starts in the mouth,
yeah,
but a lot of it starts in the house too. Hidden, it's always the hidden things that we can't see, hidden infections
self-infections.
and
Yep.
hidden exposures,
So
right?
true. And I've talked to, and I know you have too, biological dentists who do what's called cavitations, where you have a hole in an unhealed wisdom tooth or a tooth extraction. And I've asked them, I said, what do you find up in there whenever you run path reports and, test it? And they're like, we always find parasites, we find Lyme, and we find mold. Those are like the top three that they
Yep.
always find. I was just like, wow. So
Yep.
imagine having these holes up here and it just completely stagnates your lymph flow right here. And lymph is how we transfer toxins through the blood to the lymph to get it out of the body. And if that's blocked, you just have this, chronic buildup of toxicity in
Yeah.
your body. Like you were saying that
Yeah.
um, bucket theory is just completely full.
Correct.
It,
Yeah.
it's a web, and I know we're out of time, and we're gonna have to do a part two on this because there's so
Yeah.
much we can go into on that
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't address.
I would just want to say the last thing I want to close with is that, the 3 and 4 who don't deal with this, if you live with someone who is the 1 and 4, just know that it's a real thing. Like it my husband, when he and I first got married, because he didn't, he wasn't dealing with it. He didn't have the, he was continually exposed to mold. Like I said, he smelled like his clothes smelled like it. It didn't affect his health the way it affected mine. So for him, it was no big deal. And in the beginning, he's a very compassionate person. So he's never condescending. He's very kind, but he didn't understand how bad it was. And he would be like, oh, we can just cut that off the food. I'm like, no, just throw it away. Because I can't, you may be able to eat that, but I can't. I am not putting that in my body if it looks like that. I don't care
That's
if you
me.
cut it off or not, right?
If a berry of mine has a little bit of mold on it, I'm just like, let me dust
I
that
just
off.
wipe, that's what he does, and it's okay, and he's fine. But I'm like, I actually just took yogurt out of the cupboard today, or out of the refrigerator. There was like this much left, and he just skimmed it off the top, and he's gonna eat the rest, like, and he's fine. But for those of us who aren't, just have that awareness that this is a real thing, and that what we're experiencing is a real thing, and that if we're the canary in the mine, so when we start to have symptoms, then you have to go, okay, we need to figure out what's going on, just like you guys did with the dishwasher this week.
Well, I will say this in lieu of myself and your husband, because for folks that are like him and I, who have a lot better of, we may have iron stomachs that can seemingly eat anything and not ever be affected, or it just takes a lot more. We may feel bulletproof at this moment, but that's how disease will strike in our 60s and 70s because
Yeah,
it's just small accrual that we've just thought we were okay with.
yeah,
While you guys, the screaming
yeah,
alarms, were like, you know, you have to take better
yeah.
precaution.
He
Uh,
has a resting tremor that I'm pretty sure is because of the mold.
it
So
does
we
affect us all silently in some way.
does, yep. So I feel like, I've told him, I said, your hands, that tremor is not normal. And I think
Right.
it's because you lived in a moldy home for 3 years. So,
Absolutely.
we've been working on helping him to detox from that and stuff. So, but
N-
it took him like, I mean, I'll be honest, it's like we've been married for almost 9 years. It took me 8 years to get him to accept that that was what was the cause, that there
mhm.
was an issue because he was just like, I feel fine, like I feel fine.
And us stubborn men are that way. We feel fine. And it's, I guess, just built into our nature where we just want to just push through. Like, I don't go to the hospital unless I'm bleeding out or like almost dead. Like, I just
Yeah.
don't go.
Hand is severed off. Yeah.
Okay, tape it back on. I'm good. Just,
Yeah. Duct tape. Yeah.
field,
Right. Yep.
field
Yep.
dress it a bit. But I
Yeah.
think there's a really good article out there that was published by Del Bredesen, who's a medical doctor, and he wrote a book called The End of Alzheimer's. And the article is called Inhalational Alzheimer's. And what he postulated in that article of patients that he had treated and seen that had Alzheimer's didn't present with the typical Alzheimer's dementia um, examination, meaning that whatever developed the amyloid beta plaque in their brain, whether it be heavy metals or some other type of environmental toxin, he found that most all of them had mold mycotoxins. And mold
Hmm.
mycotoxins are unique. My pin here, one end I write with, and the other end I click to get the ballpoint to come out. On each piece end of mold, one end loves fat, one end loves water. So this is why it's so hard for the immune system to catch mold. And it's why its mold is so easy to evade our immune system because it can travel in and out of almost any tissue.
Yep.
Our
Because
cells,
because we
fat cells,
either love fat or love water, and if it has both,
it loves both.
it's not good.
And all toxins store in our fat cells. And for women, I think that's why they're more predisposed to these toxins because in general, just by physiology, women have
Yeah,
more
more fat
fat
cells.
mass on their
Yep.
body than men
Right.
do.
Yeah.
So when it's trapped there, you have a more toxic buildup in yourself than me or your husband does, and I think
Yeah.
that has a play in it as well. But
Right. Yep. And that's why, maintaining a good body weight is great and helpful. But when people start to lose weight, sometimes they don't feel great at first because
mobilizing toxin,
they're mobilizing the toxins. So I always recommend if you're going to do weight loss program, you need to be working on your detox pathways and things to support
absolutely,
your body's ability to detoxify. So
such a good point right there. Great,
yeah,
that's awesome. Well, I do want to do a part two on this video so we can talk
yeah,
more about strategies on what people can do if they're
yeah,
in mold. The whole remediation process or how to
yeah,
find a qualified inspector, questions
yeah.
they should
Because
ask
that's
them.
not easy.
It is not, and it's taken me years of trial and error to find the right people and just my own years of research. And I do have an indoor environmental professional coming out Monday who even said he'd be willing to do a podcast, and
Oh,
he's
nice.
on the ICEA.org website. And if people aren't familiar with that, it's ISEAI.org, and that stands for the International Society of Environmentally Acquired Illness. um, a huge resource that people can go to. And an IEP, indoor environmental professional, is what you want whenever you are doing a remediation process because they have, while they're not healthcare practitioners, they do have a great understanding of how mold affects people's health.
Yep.
And they know how to go about remediating your house appropriately by creating the negative containments, creating the negative pressure so that you don't have a backflow of mycotoxins into the house. And they know what they're testing and assessing for. Not all of them, but most of them do. There are some bad IEPs out there, unfortunately, like there's bad apples in every industry, but
Sure.
um, they have a better idea. They don't just come in your house with bleach and spray and walk away and say, "Hey, it's good," like a general contractor would that has a 3-day mold training weekend under his belt. It's a lot more than that. So I definitely want to do a part two next week so people can have more takeaways that they can begin implementing. But this is a very informative video that I think
Yeah.
everybody needs to have their awareness raised on.
Yeah.
Uh, so that they can have their homes be a healing sanctuary and not something
Right.
that's making them chronically ill.
Yeah, right. Anyway, we actually had to move out of our last house because we could not keep it was going to take major work to we had one place in the basement that just kept taking water. After we redid the foundation and everything, it was 100-year-old home and it had Bilco doors. And so it was
Oh man.
constantly letting just a little bit in on a really heavy downpour. And I just I couldn't live there anymore. And I loved my home. It was a beautiful historic home, like marble, hardwood, pocket doors, 3-story staircase. You know, it was gorgeous, but we had to move because it was really affecting my health. So,
Sometimes we just got to do what's best for the individual, swallow our pride, and know that, mold is one of those unique situations where you don't have a true flood, like a hurricane came in and just flooded your house and destroyed it from true, like flooded everything. It wasn't a tornado that just decimated your home, and it wasn't a fire that burnt everything to the ground. We still have emotional connections to things in the house, to belongings, to pictures, to
yeah,
porous items where mold can trap into books and furniture. And when it wasn't burnt down or lodged out of the house 2 blocks away from a tornado, or saturated in water from a real flood, it's much harder to get rid of these things. And therefore, you have that mental emotional piece to it that for some people, it's hard to let go. So you can intuitively take your mold problem with you when you bring the belongings from one environment to another. And that's a
yeah,
whole topic too that
yeah,
we can address this week. But
yeah, for sure.
I've had to walk away from everything. My wife and I had to just, what, it's not worth it because
Yeah,
the money ended up costing more. It's like I think we spent more money on treating you when we could have just used that same money to rebuy our new stuff.
right.
It's just stuff.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
just
stuff.
stuff. It's just stuff for sure.
It's well, Teresa, this has been
Uh,
phenomenal. This is one of my all-time at-home passionate topics to talk about. I love it, and I could go on
yeah,
all. I know
yeah,
you got to go. You've got other commitments to be at, so
yeah,
I want to respect your time. But thank you so much for being here with me
yeah.
today.
It's always
Any
a
last
pleasure.
words of wisdom?
No, I just hope we raise awareness that this is a real thing. It's not just woo woo. It's not just hokey pokey fun. It really is a serious issue. For some people, it's more serious than others and needs to be taken seriously. So,
100%. Well, I agree with you, and thank you so much for being here again. And I look
yeah,
forward to our part two of this next week.
you're welcome. Have a lovely weekend.
You too, Teresa. Thanks.
Uh-huh. Bye.